Amnesty International has accused Israel of being an apartheid state. Its newly released 278-page report found Israel has maintained, quote, a system of oppression and domination over Palestinians within Israel's borders and the occupied territories. Amnesty highlighted the regular eviction of Palestinian families from their homes under the illegal settlement program, as well as the restriction of movement and lack of political rights given to Arabs.
It's not the act of violence. I have seen violence before. It is the cruelty of the system, the intricate, evolving administration of control, dispossession and inequality, the incredible, detailed bureaucratization upon which that system is predicated.
Amnesty joins a growing list of rights groups which have made such a determination, which includes Human Rights Watch and other similar agencies. Now, Israel rejects any allegation of apartheid. Its foreign minister says the report is false, biased and anti-Semitic. Joining me now for his thoughts on this report is the president of the Zionist Federation of Australia, Jeremy Leibler. Jeremy, thanks for your time. I know you've been critical of the broader findings in this Amnesty International report, but can Israel learn anything from what's been uncovered in this analysis?
Well, Kieran, firstly, thanks for having me. It's difficult to learn something from a report that in effect calls for your destruction or national suicide. So I think there is certainly room in the debate. Israel is not beyond reproach. Israel is not beyond criticism. It is certainly not perfect. It is a democracy like Australia, like the United States, that has its imperfections. But this report does not give Israel any option to be legitimate in the eyes of Amnesty International unless it literally commits national suicide and ceases to be a Jewish state. So it's quite difficult, I think, in this situation.
One of the glaring issues, it's been a major issue for a number of years now, is this issue of settlements. Does that make Israel a bigger target?
Look, Israel lives in a very complicated and difficult part of the Middle East. And settlements and the discussion, be it criticism, has a role to play in finding a resolution to, what feels like a never-ending conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. But what we need is nuanced, thoughtful and balanced interrogation of these issues. And if you take this report, it was launched yesterday in Lebanon by Amnesty International. Lebanon is a country that denies its Palestinian inhabitants basic human rights: the right to vote, the right to own property, the right to work in many, many industries, including education, healthcare. Whereas Israel has 20% of its population who are Arab or Palestinian. They have full equal rights. They vote in elections. The current government has Mansour Abbas as a senior minister in the government from an Arab Islamist party. There is an Arab judge on the Supreme Court. There are Arab doctors. Anyone that has been to Israel would know that the allegation of apartheid is simply false and an insult to those that suffered under real apartheid regime in South Africa.
But going back to that issue of the settlements, this is one of the things seized on by Amnesty and others in criticising Israel. In hindsight, would it have been better that Israel prevent those settlements from the outset in order to try and strike a two-state solution?
Well, the issue of settlements needs to be resolved in the context of a negotiated two-state solution. And the truth is, Kieran, we don't have to actually look too far to understand what that resolution looked like. In the Camp David discussions, they pretty much got us close, and Israel was prepared to abandon many settlements. Some of the other major settlement blocks that are effectively, attached to Israel would become part of Israel. There would be land swaps in respect of other parts of Israel to compensate to make a future Palestinian state viable. The building blocks are there. The reason why a two-state solution has not yet happened is because Palestinians have rejected those offers and refused to return to the negotiating table. And in the course of all those discussions, There is the never-ending stream of terrorism, suicide bombings into Israel. I mean, if you take the issue of checkpoints, which are connected to settlements, there are checkpoints in the West Bank, and they do cause hardship to Palestinians, and it is difficult. And the Amnesty reports talks about the checkpoints, but they don't mention why those checkpoints were created. And that was because over a 7-year period when peace talks started in the 1990s, suicide bombers came over the border and blew themselves up in cafes, restaurants, shopping centres, killing hundreds of innocent civilians, women, children, men, without regard to who the targets were. So these are complicated issues. And I think, Kieran, the sad part of all of this, this report will come and go as others have. It's not going to resolve the conflict. The sad part is that this has basically undermined the credibility of a human rights organisation, because if they can reach this one-sided conclusion about Israel, which is most definitely not an apartheid state, then one must seriously question, their reports and comments in other conflicts as well, which undermines, the cause of human rights and peace all around the world.